we'll just take that as a given. And we'd like to thank the Georgia Council for the Arts for their support for this event, and also all our local sponsors. So as you look through your program and you see the folks who are supporting this, our 10th year. Our 10th year! Yay! Please thank those people for their support. And I would also like to point out that the Georgia Mountain Storytelling Festival did not shut down for the pandemic. Yay! Amanda and Ruth are tremendously creative, resourceful, brave, and courageous, tireless people who made sure that this event, which is important to not just us, but to the community, and to fostering humanity. Dare we say that now in this particular era where humanity is lacking. So celebrate that with one another, and certainly with our next teller, Nancy Pheasant, who brings us the Cherokee tradition. I'm not going to tell you things about her that you could read in your program. I will simply let her speak for herself and the Cherokee. Nancy. Thank you.
Shio, Nashi Tandisti Dalguado, Wayohi de Guena Sha'i. That's just a small sampling of my Cherokee language. What I said, Shio, is the Cherokee word for hello. Nashi Tandisti is my Cherokee name. My English name you will find in your booklets is Nancy Pheasant. I'm from Zalagi, North Carolina, Cherokee, North Carolina. I live on the Qualla boundary. We are not an Indian reservation, although the sign to the entrance to where I live says Cherokee Indian Reservation. We are actually a boundary, and there is a difference. I'll go into a little bit more of that here in just a little bit. I am honored to be here today with you. I've been asked to come share my Cherokee culture with you, and one of the ways that we do that is through storytelling. We call it our oral history. You may have heard it as legends. You may have heard it as myths. It is how we shared our knowledge, our traditions, our ceremonies, and our culture from one to another. So I'm here not only to be a storyteller, but also to share today. One of the unique things about Cherokee is the way we dress. And believe me, I've gotten a lot of looks today. This is the type of clothing that we would have worn back in the early 1700s when the white settlers had came into this area and introduced us to cloth, to fiber, to clothing. At one time, the Cherokee did not realize that we needed to be modest. You guys have heard a number of years ago where there was this big to-do about women being able to breastfeed in public. Cherokees never realized that there was anything different. So a lot of the women, especially in the summer months when it's hot, 80 degrees and very humid, because where I live in Cherokee, just outside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the Blue Ridge Parkway, it's actually considered a rainforest. So we get very humid there. But the Cherokee women would walk around with only a small covering to cover from their waist down. The men also the same. You guys have probably seen early pictures of what the men would dress like. They would have their breechcloths. Women wore wrap skirts made out of leathers or made out of fibers that we twined and created our fabric with. Once the white settlers came into the area, they said, whoa, whoa, you gotta cover up. They didn't want to see us dressed that way. So in turn, what they did was the women gave us their petticoats, their undergarments to wear. The men would wear their trade shirts. But because we were so used to wearing wrap skirts that we would trade for the wool blankets that the U.S. soldiers would bring into our area. And we made our wrap skirts out of those. So this is wool, linen, and you notice I have ribbons that decorate the very bottom of my skirting. Originally, we would paint red clay or red ochre onto the very base of our skirts. You guys have seen in Hollywood all the big fancy demonstrations of Indian painting. The red handprint represents the missing and murdered indigenous people for the Native Americans. But the red handprint, or red in general, was also used as decoration. You saw it a lot of times slapped on the rear quarter of a horse. Very popular image. These are all stereotypes. Yes, we did that, but it was significant to us as Cherokee people. So, I've been asked to come here today. I like to talk about my clothing because that's the one thing that I stand out with. If I was dressed just like you guys in a pair of Levi's, a t-shirt, and a pair of Vans on my feet, you probably wouldn't look at me a second time. But because I am dressed a little differently today, I also like to tell you that our clothing communicates. It talks to people. It talks to my other Cherokee family. It represents things. For instance, the belt that I'm wearing. This is called a finger-woven belt made out of yarn. But what's really interesting about it is the knot. You see my knot here? Communicates to others. It tells people, number one, that I am taken, that I am committed to another, because it's on the right side of my body, or on the left side of my body. If it's on the right side of the body, I'm available. Guys, it's on the left. The other unique thing about my outfit today is my moccasins that I wear. These are the traditional Cherokee moccasins. They are a single seam that goes from the tip of the toe all the way up to my ankle. It's called pucker toe. And you will notice the grooves that come together and make that single seam coming up. But if you were from another tribe, you could look at my feet and tell where I come from, simply by the way I wear them, the color that they are. Do they have one seam? Do they have two seams? Do they have a tail off of the heel? So everything about my clothing today speaks volumes, just like our stories do. One of the very famous stories that you can find documented in a lot of books and textbooks. There's one that's very well known by James Mooney. He wrote these stories, or retold these stories, in the early 1890s, I think was the first time his book was published. He actually came to Cherokee and spoke to other people and got their stories. And he wrote those stories down. Like I said earlier, they are our traditions. They are our culture. This is our history. One of the unique things about the Cherokee people, we believed, and still do to this day, that we could communicate with nature, with the plants, with the animals. How many of you here today can communicate with animals? I can. How many of you have a pet at home? Did you speak to your pet this morning? Tell it to stay? Tell it to go eat? Not that he would, exactly. My little one doesn't always listen either. She's learning. But that is how we communicate. It's still a form of communication. But at one time, the Cherokee people believed that the animals spoke our language, the Cherokee language. In the very beginning, all the animals, when they were first here on earth, placed on earth, they were in their original form. They were pure white. Pretty interesting. One of my favorite stories is the story of the first fire, and that is what I'd like to share with you today. The first fire. In the very beginning, the world was cold. The world was dark, and the world was covered with a lot of water. The animals realized that the Cherokee people were lacking. They didn't have fur. They didn't have feathers to keep themselves warm. How would they survive? The animals came together and said, "We will speak for the Cherokee people. We want to help them." So they went to the Creator, who lived up in the sky vault, and said, "There's got to be something we can do. What can we do to help the Cherokee people? They have no way to cook. They have no way to see. They have no way to stay warm." The Creator thought about this, and he said, "You know what? You're right. I didn't create anything. Let me think about this." So he turned to his two boys, and he did have two boys that lived with him in the sky vault. One was named Thunder, the other one was named Lightning, and we hear him every day in some form or fashion. He went to his sons and he said, "Hey, we need to come up with a solution. What can you think of?" And just like boys, what's the first thing they're going to do? They argued, right? They started chasing each other, one after the other. Thunder made as much noise as he possibly could to scare his brother, Lightning. Well, Lightning had an advantage. He had his thunderbolt, and he would throw those thunderbolts at his brother. His brother would turn and make this big thunderous noise, and the Cherokee people would cower. And they'd look in the sky because they thought a storm was coming. And they would go to find protection in the caves, underground, anywhere they could get, because they were scared of all the lightning and all the thunder. Well, as lightning and thunder were chasing each other, one of the lightning bolts missed, and it came down from the sky vault and landed in the very top of a sycamore tree. Well, this sycamore tree exploded, but the lightning bolt shot straight down through the trunk of the tree, hit the ground in the bottom, and created fire. Wow, that's a solution. The Creator turned back to the animals and said, "There you go. You figure out how to get the fire. You can gift it to the Cherokee people." So they gathered council. They called a great meeting, and everyone came together. And they said, "Who wants to go? Who wants to be the first to get the fire?" The biggest, the tallest, the strongest, and he thought he was the smartest animal stepped forward. His name was Yonah, which is the Cherokee word for bear. He stood before him and he said, "I will go. I will get the fire." But there was one problem. The sycamore tree was in the middle of an island, water all around. Yonah had never been in the water before. So he comes up to the water's edge, sticks his foot in. Oh, that's cold. Most of the waters around here are very cold. So he thought, let me stand here for a minute. When you stand in the water, what happens? Starts to feel warm, right? So he started waiting. And as he waited, the water rose. And he kept going. The water got a little higher and higher. Soon it was up to his hips. Before long, it was up to his shoulders. Whoa, whoa, this is a little scary for me. What do I do? What happens if my head goes under? I won't be able to breathe. No matter, I've got to get that fire. So that's what he did. He went forward. Well, as he went forward, his feet, his paws were barely touching the bottom, and he lost his balance. Just like me and you, what's the first thing you think he did? He reached out with a big paw. And when he did, he slapped the top of the water to catch himself from falling and going under. Well, when he did that, he pushed down. When he pushed down, he pushed the water behind him, and he went forward. Whoa! Let me do that again. So he did. He reached forward, grabbed another big pawful of water, and pushed down again and behind him, and he went forward again. First time Yonah, the bear, had ever learned to swim. He kept doing that, one after the other, and it wasn't long before he was able to climb up on the other side to the island, and he went straight to this big sycamore tree. As he got close, he felt the heat coming off of it. He brushed up against it, testing it to see if he could push it over. He walked all around the tree looking for an opening. There was none. But he could see the smoke swirling coming out of the top of the tree. He thought, maybe I can climb it. And he reached in with his big claws. But when he reached around the tree, it was too hot. He couldn't touch it. But where he reached around, it singed all that beautiful white fur yellow. And he thought, well, maybe I can push it down. So he got way back. He looked at the tree, squared it up, and just like a linebacker, went running at it. And as he was running, he put his shoulder down, and he hit the edge of that tree, and it knocked him back. The tree didn't move. The fire still within. Singed his hair a little darker. Well, he kept trying this. He tried this way. He tried that way. Sure enough, every time he brushed up against the tree, his fur got darker and darker. When he was white, what kind of bear was he? Polar bear. When he turned yellow, what kind of bear was he? A grizzly bear. He done it so many times, his fur was scorched black, like the bears we have in these mountains. Our Cherokee stories are also creation stories. They tell us why the animals look the way they do today, why they act a certain way. You see, he changed, but he knew he couldn't get that fire, and he turned and went back, and he told the animals, sorry guys, I just couldn't do it. Who else wants to go? And they thought about it. He was the strongest. He was the bravest. He thought he was the smartest. But he found out, no, he couldn't get the fire. The next animal that chose to go was no longer four-footed. This animal was a bird. Didn't have to worry about swimming across. Just flew over. Beautiful white bird, long feathers. Flew over the top, circled around. Just as he looked in to see the fire below, big ball of hot air and smoke and ash and soot came up, billowing out of the top of that tree. As this bird flew over and looked down, got a face full of that smoke and the soot. came away coughing and spitting and sputtering, singed from the top of his head to the tip of his claws. Eyes burnt red from the smoke. He came back and he tried to talk to the animals, tried to tell them, sorry, I couldn't get the fire either, but all that would come out was a small squeaking caw, caw. What bird was it?
Crow, raven, or raven.
Exactly. So when you see a crow or a raven today, what color is its eyes? What color is their feathers?
Black.
Black. And they scream out in a husky, raspy voice, caw, caw. Couldn't get the fire. Who's going to go this time? Well, they heard in the very back of the room this very small voice. She spoke up and said, let me go. They all turned and looked. They didn't see anyone, so they dismissed it. Who's going to go? One of the panthers came up and said, I'll try. The bird couldn't do it. The bear couldn't do it. I'll try. So he swam across, got to the island, went right up to the tree, was walking around, looking at it, couldn't find an opening. He was so mad that he reached out and kicked the tree. When he did, his claw caught the edge of the bark and pulled a piece away, created a very small opening. And he looked in and he saw this glowing light and felt the heat. But he decided, I'm not going to do this, and went back. The little voice in the back of the room once again said, let me go. Let me try. They turned and looked, couldn't find anyone. They heard the voice, but didn't see the creature. Who else is going to go? Well, none of the four-footed animals would go. None of the birds would go. Who's left? The insects, the reptiles, the snakes. The snakes decided, we'll try. And there was a snake. You guys may know him as the blue racer. At one point in time, beautiful blue skin, almost iridescent in color. Said, I'll go. Slithered right over the top of the water. Got to the island, went around the big sycamore tree, found that little opening, crawled right in. No problem. But wait. Got inside and realized that the fire and the embers were burning so hot that it scorched both sides of his body. As he was trying to get in and weaving around each one of those coals to find that opening to get back out, when he came out, all he had was single blue stripes on either side of his body. That's the blue racer today. There's a green snake, one of the biggest snakes ever, wonderful at climbing trees, volunteered to go. Said, I'll go. Swam right over the top of the water, got to the big tree, climbed right up the edge, got to the top and looked in. Well, when he looked in, that smoke, the soot, and the hot air once again burst forth, and he got choked up and fell all the way to the bottom. This was a pretty big snake. That opening was really tiny. Weaving in and out, trying to get away from the coals, rolling on top of himself, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, he found that little opening, and he squeezed his way through. By now, he was burnt black, the big black snake. But when he crawled out of the sycamore tree, that tiny opening caused his flesh to be pulled from his body. What is the one thing that snakes still do to this day once a year? They shed their skin. Pretty interesting, huh? came back, once again said to all the other animals, "Sorry, I couldn't get the fire either." They heard in the back of the room that tiny little voice. They finally turned and looked, and it was Amani Kananishki. Amani Kananishki is the Cherokee word for the water spider. She was really tiny. She stepped forward, and she said, "Let me try." "But you're so small. What can you do? How are you going to get the fire?" She said, "I've got a plan." Smart. She said, "Watch." One of the unique things about the water spiders are when they are ready to hatch their children, they make a little egg sac and they dive way down deep into the very bottom of the riverbed. And they bury a little section out and they make sure it's in between the little rocks. And that's where they put their little egg sac, and they wait for the egg sac to be ready for her babies to hatch. And then they come to the very top, scatter out across the surface of the water, and make new homes. Amani Kananishki could hold her breath for a very long time. That's why she went to the bottom to place her egg sac. When you go to the river and you see people stacking rocks, just know that's not a good thing to do. It destroys ecosystems within the river. Remember, that's where she puts her egg sac. Very important not to build those temporary dams out of river rock. She knew she could hold her breath for a long time. She knew that she could skim across the top of the water and get to the island. She got over there. But by this time, lightning and thunder, remember those guys in the sky vault? They said, "We don't want anyone to have that fire." So they started watching and noticing, but they didn't see her. And she knew that. So in order to get close to the sycamore tree, she found the first rock she could find, and she scurried over there and hid by that rock. She looked, "There's a twig. I can get over there." And she scurried over there and hid by the twig. She found a dry leaf, done the same thing, scurried over there and hid underneath that dry leaf. That's how she made her way to the sycamore tree without being seen by lightning and thunder. And if you watch spiders today, they do exactly that. They scurry and hide till they get to where they need to go. So she did this. She got to the sycamore tree and she thought, how am I going to carry that hot, burning ember back to my people? She thought about it, and she remembered one of her very best friends who lived by the river next to her. It was called the mud dauber. How many of you know what a mud dauber is? How many of you have seen the little mud tunnels that they build? That's where they live. That's where they deposit their young, their babies, to come out of those little tunnels. She remembered that they gather that mud by the river. So she grabbed a mud ball and formed it into a bowl. She also grabbed mud and she made a lid to go on top of the bowl. That's great. But she would have to hold this bowl to get back, and it was made of mud. She entered into the water, what would happen? It would dissolve. It would no longer be a bowl. So she had to think about this. Remember, she had a plan. She knew what she was going to do. She spun a web, put it on her back, and anchored that bowl to her back. She scurried in the little hole that the panther had created, scooped up the tiniest little ember, put it in her bowl, put the lid on, and went to hide from lightning and thunder once again, and scurried her way back to the river. They saw her. They came running to chase her, and they tried to stomp on her, but she was too fast. She was too quick. She got to the edge of the river and dove deep down to the very bottom. They came running and looked. They couldn't find her anywhere. But they knew something. They knew the water would wash the fire from that ember. So she would not get the gift of fire at all. So they went back to arguing, back to the sky vault, chasing each other. She waited until she saw them ascend back into the sky, and she came back to the surface. When she got out of the river, she walked proudly, confidently back to the animal council, took the bowl off her back, took the lid off the bowl, reached in and presented the first ember to the Cherokee people. With our legends that we tell, we also teach a story. What story did you get from that? What life lesson did you get from that story? Anyone want to take a guess?
Have a plan.
Have a clan? That's a good one. Have a plan. That's a good one.
It's not always the biggest and strongest who succeed in the task at hand.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
The lesson to this story not only is the interconnectedness that the Cherokee people have with the nature and our surroundings, but if you think about it, it doesn't matter how big or how small you are. You can do great things. You can do great things for yourself. You can do great things for your neighbors. You can do great things for your family, or your clan, or your tribe, or the nation, or the world. So remember that. Doesn't matter how small you are. All it takes is a plan. That's the Cherokee legend of the first fire. I know I have a lot of time. I have a lot of stories that I could tell, but I would really like to open it up to you guys as an audience to answer maybe any questions that you may have about the Cherokee culture. I promise you, if I don't know the answer, we'll Google it together. How's that? So any questions? Yes?
I have one. All of the paper that I have about my grandfather's property says Cherokee Land Lottery.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the property that we have once belonged to your people.
Right.
What stories do you tell about that incident, that time,
About the Trail of Tears?
that, and what happened to the land afterwards?
What happened to the land afterwards? So her question, or basically what she's saying, is that her family had what's known to be Cherokee land at one time, and that it was taken and given to the family. Cherokee history is very well documented. It's one of the most unique things about the Cherokee people in itself. Number one, we have a language. Number two, that language is a written language. So there's a lot of documentation on exactly what happened. The white settlers came into this area and they thought we had gold here. Guess what? We had some gold, very small trace amounts of gold. Not the gold that they were looking for. But because they thought we had gold, they wanted our land. They wanted it by all costs. And it didn't matter to them. All they wanted was the Cherokee people gone. And it wasn't just Cherokee. It was a lot of indigenous native tribes across the entire nation. They were land hungry. They were coming from overseas. They were looking for their new start. But in order to get that new start, they had to develop their own homesteads. So in order to do that, they went to the U.S. Congress at the time, the president at the time. And there was a number of different presidents through this entire era because it didn't happen overnight. It took, the Cherokee fought so hard and so long to stay where we are today. We didn't win the fight to some degree. We were still removed from our land. Today we call it the Trail of Tears. There's multiple routes. There was one water route. They chose not to continue with the water route because they realized that moving that many people was very detrimental. We all started dying off really quickly. They would gather us up because we didn't live in one little spot. We were scattered out over 7 different states. Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, parts of Virginia, Kentucky. We were scattered out, and small villages all around. So they sent soldiers to all these villages. And if we weren't willing to up and leave, they burnt our homes. They destroyed our crops. They killed our pets. They gathered us up and created these forts to kind of quarantine us because we were dirty. We were savages. We had no society. And they moved us in to these forts. They gave us diseased blankets with smallpox. They introduced us to alcohol, which created alcoholism because that stuff is good. A lot of our ancestors, we still fight that battle today. But it's not only alcohol now. We've been introduced to a lot of other bad things. As far as the land is today, it's the reason why I say we don't live on a reservation, because most of the Cherokee Nation was removed from this land around here and sent to Indian Territory, and at that time they were making reservations for all the indigenous tribes in Oklahoma. Cherokee Nation as a tribe was gathered up and deposited in Oklahoma. We have 3 branches to the Cherokee Nation. Our capital, if you will, is in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. That's on a Cherokee Indian reservation there. They have probably around, I want to say around 280,000 enrolled members in Tahlequah, Oklahoma right now. Cherokee, North Carolina, where I come from, we've got approximately 43,000 enrolled members. The reason we're still in North Carolina is because of a couple of different things. Number one, not all of us agreed to go. We took off and hid as much as we could in the surrounding areas because we knew these mountains. We knew these lakes. We knew all the neat hiding places. And that's where we went. But not all of us survived. They still found us. They searched for us and took us one by one to these big forts before we were moved out west. There was a small group of people called the United Kadua Band. They voluntarily said, we don't want to be housed in these forts. We don't want to be crowded with the rest of our people. We volunteer to go ourselves to Oklahoma. And that's exactly what they did. There was about 800 families that moved from these mountains to Oklahoma on their own. they're still there. The United Cadua Band, the Cherokee Nation, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians that still remain in North Carolina. Any of you guys ever heard of the man by the name of Solly? Yes, very well documented. Martyr. They killed his 3 sons. He had 4. The little 5-year-old was the only one that survived. In the outdoor drama, Unto These Hills, in Cherokee, it tells that story of the Trail of Tears. It starts back in the 1500s, takes you up to what happened and why we were removed. Takes you through the Trail of Tears. And once we got to Oklahoma, and then that's where our story ends. But the Cherokee Nation has part 2. They pick that up, and they talk about in their drama how they were able to reestablish themselves in an unknown land, away from the mountains, away from everything that they knew. Solly is the reason most of us are still here in North Carolina, but he's not the only reason. There was a lot of people. How many of you are familiar with Murphy, North Carolina? How many are you from Murphy, North Carolina? There is a grave. I'm not going to tell you where. Very prominent grave of a man that they had took to put him on the Trail of Tears. What's very interesting is that he was 80 years old at the time. He was also blind. They started him on that march to Oklahoma. He escaped. Blind. Walked back to Murphy. Picked up his roots where he was from. Reestablished himself and his family. And he is buried there today. 80 years old and blind, and walked back from Oklahoma on his own to stay in these mountains. And it gives me goosebumps. That's my people. That's my ancestors. People always ask me why I come out and tell these things, because it is difficult at times. But the reason I do is because I want to share my history with you. But I also want you to learn and not make the same mistakes. Hopefully you will not make those same mistakes, because we are shared brothers and sisters from one people. You have a question?
Yeah, could you share a little bit about non-Cherokee telling Cherokee stories? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think some things fine and some don't, and a lot of the storytellers would like to share those stories, and we don't really know what to do.
I am not against it, number one, because there's plenty of opportunities for our stories to be shared and those lessons to be learned and our histories to be told. However, I do have a problem when somebody stands up here and says that they're Cherokee when they're not. It's the only time that I ever have an issue with that. But if you stand up here confidently and share my history with others, but you're very upfront and you tell them, I am not Cherokee, but I know this history and I want to share it with you, I will stand beside you and help you, as long as the story is being told correctly and historically. Because as a child in high school, I wasn't taught this in my history class. Were you? No. You have to wait until opportunities like this, when somebody does stand up, stands forward, and comes out to share that knowledge, that information, our culture, and our history. So thank you for that. I appreciate that question. So yes.
Well, I don't know if a lot of people know this. I learned this about your culture
Mhm.
and your people, is that women have a very prominent role and are allowed to, and I really celebrate that.
Yes. The Cherokee people,
You repeat the question, please?
say that again.
Well, what I understand, what I've learned about the Cherokee tribe is that women have a very prominent role in their society.
She is basically,
They're allowed to.
right. She is basically talking about the Cherokee society in general
Yeah,
and the fact that we are matrilineal,
wow.
meaning that women were held in very high regard. We were, well, this, for example, how many of you knew that during the American Revolution that Cherokee women were the only ones that fought in the American Revolution? We were warriors. We were soldiers out there fighting alongside our men. Because we knew that once they went off to war, we may never see them again. And we wanted to make sure that they came back. Equality, exactly. We were not higher than men, by no means. We were equal to. We walked beside our men, not behind and not in front. We walked beside our men. We call them our better half for a reason. They call us better halves for a reason. Because it takes those two halves to make that whole. Cherokee women, we had war chiefs and peace chiefs. But we also had what we call beloved women that served along with those war chiefs and the peace chiefs. So anytime that the Creeks came, we love the Creeks. They're our neighbors. But there are brothers that we love to fight with. So when it come to the Creeks, a lot of disagreements happened. Women were right there making those same decisions with the men. Do we fight the Creeks? No, we don't fight them. They're our equals. Let's hold a game instead. Let's hold a contest instead. How many of you guys have heard of Cherokee stickball? How many of you have heard of lacrosse? They're one and the same. Lacrosse has rules. Cherokee stickball does not. Women played stickball at one time. We no longer play stickball today. We leave that to the men to do because it is called the little brother of war. It's a game. So if we had a beef with you, we didn't resolve that beef right away. We waited until the game of stickball. And a lot of the disagreements were decided on that field. Whoever was the victor of the game itself was the ultimate winner. Did I hold that grudge against you afterwards? No, because it was settled on that field.
And our politicians need to have that.
Exactly. Exactly. I saw somebody else with a hand back here. Yes.
From my study, the matrilineal tribes trace their trace their descendancy through the women.
Exactly.
And is that still observed now?
Yes. Very much so.
I just always thought that how much more sure or how much better it is to trace lineage from mother to daughter, because there's no interruption or no. You can have a king and a queen have a child, or have a queen have a child, and it inherit the kingdom, but it's the stable boy's son.
Exactly. So when I said earlier that we are matrilineal versus matriarchal, two different words here. Matrilineal is in a line. It's how we trace our lineage. It's how we trace our ancestry is through the mother's side. So when I was ready to select a husband, The unique thing about Cherokee marriages, it's not all tied up with all this law. It's not just a paper that's handed or signed. You as a spouse, as a husband coming into my home, that's how it was. You came to my home. I didn't go to your home. I owned the home. I owned the land. I owned the fields that we cultivated together. The children were mine. You were my helpmate. You provided for a family. You provided for my children. Our society is made up. You've heard that old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. It's what we did. The uncles of the family were responsible to teach my children how to hunt, how to fish, how to defend themselves. The aunties in my family were just as responsible for disciplining my child as I am for their children. We were a very strong, knit society. It's not like it is today. You hope your neighbor would come and help you in a time of need, right? We had whole communities that would step up and come help. Whole clans that would step up and come help. Our clans, we recognize only 7 today, but before the Trail of Tears, there were more than 63 different clans. Because of the Trail of Tears and the number of people that we lost at that time, whole clans were killed out. Whole clans didn't make it to Oklahoma. So in order to keep our clan system in check, a lot of clans were merged. There's one that's out there, it's a little odd, it's called the Twister clan. They were merged with our Long Hair clan. The 7 different clans of the Cherokee, I'm Wolf clan, by the way. Wolf, bird, paint, blue, deer, long hair, and wall potato. Those are the 7 clans that we recognize today. If you come to Cherokee and you just drive around the boundary, I live in Wolftown. Interesting, I'm from the Wolf clan. I live in Wolftown community. There's Birdtown community. We also have other communities. We have Paint Town from the Paint clan. So we still honor that clanship. We still honor that matrilineal link in our families. Yes, another question?
Like if somebody were to come to your clan, would you let them come in and tell them about your history? And tell them how you still live and with the traditions that are being kept up from
One of the unique things about our ceremonies that we still hold today, we still do our ceremonies. It's kind of like our language. The white settlers that came into the area, you guys have heard about the boarding schools and what has happened, Orange Shirt Day and all that. They found these mass graves because of the boarding schools and stuff where they were killing off the Cherokee children in these schools. It's also another reason why we come close to losing our language was because my great-grandparents that went to the boarding schools themselves were persecuted if they spoke their own language. So my great-grandparents didn't teach my grandparents how to speak Cherokee. They didn't want them to have to go through the exact same thing that they went through in the boarding schools. As far as the clanship itself, to share that, there's some things that I'll talk about and other things that I don't talk about because that's very sacred to me. That's almost my religion, if you will. Don't get me wrong. My mom and dad are from one religion. I did not choose to go their route, it's Christian religion. I went a different route. I do believe in Christianity, but I also believe in my traditional culture, our traditional ceremonies. And we still hold our ceremonies today. A long time ago, our ceremonies were done out in the open in the light of day. Not anymore. Most of our ceremonies are now done late evening, almost at dusk, into the darkness because of that persecution that we faced. They wanted to erase everything about us as indigenous people. They wanted us to turn into apples. And I use the apple as a similarity, if you will. When you bite into an apple, what color is it inside?
White.
Color is it outside?
Red.
It's what they wanted us to become. White on the inside, but red on the outside. I'm not an apple. Yes?
Is the name Sakalasa familiar to you?
No. Can you give me a little history on it?
Her Christian name was Gertrude Simmons,
Okay.
became Bowen.
There are some Simmons that live in the Gatlinburg area. I know of one Simmons that lives in Cherokee, but he is not Cherokee. I don't know if that is related in any ways, but that's the only time I've ever heard that surname.
She was very instrumental in gaining citizenship for the Native Americans into the new government.
Awesome.
And she was a great advocate for women. She became a suffragette. She
Mhm.
also, was very much an advocate, and she was part of the forced immigration. And I found out last year that she's a cousin.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. It's awesome. I'm glad.
I don't know the culture at all. I'm researching a lot, but her stories are not going to die, and I would love to talk to you later.
Oh, absolutely. Afterwards, I'll be happy to stop and talk with you. Yes.
In trying to keep the language alive, or
Mhm.
is it being, you said it when you didn't find out in your North Carolina history, and I didn't either being from North Carolina, this whole thing of the Trail of Tears. I mean, it was just a blip,
Mm-hmm.
you know. In trying to keep that history alive and the language, is it being taught more in the schools?
Actually, yes, it is. Even as a small child myself, going to a state-run school, I was given 1 hour a day in my own native tongue. Today, there's a full revitalization of our language because we came very close to losing our language. We have a full immersion school now in Cherokee, North Carolina. They also have a full immersion school in Oklahoma, in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. They had their immersion school first. Mind you, Cherokee Nation is so much larger than we are. We're small compared to them. We're very fortunate in, I guess, our business practices because we're very resilient, number one. And we have looked for ways to make our tribe significant, not only financially, but also politically. The Eastern Band and the Cherokee Nation as a core, very instrumental in getting legislation passed to help us as a tribe. And we were able to get our Cherokee language recognized simply because of the fact that it is the only indigenous language that is written here. No other, Navajo, Dene, Seminole, Chickasaw, any of them you can name, they have a language, but it's not written. That language was created by Sequoia. But before I go down that rabbit hole, because that's a whole new little rabbit hole here, our Cherokee language, we have a full immersion school in Cherokee, North Carolina. My grandchildren, and yes, I am old enough to have grandkids, thank you. My grandchildren go to that immersion school. As soon as they walk through those front doors, they no longer hear English whatsoever. Even the janitor speaks Cherokee. They're like sponges.
That's wonderful.
They eat this up. My grandkids can speak the Cherokee language a lot better than I can. I consider myself a second language learner. We do still have fluent first language speakers in Cherokee, North Carolina, but because of COVID, we lost a lot of our elders. We are down to less than 150 people in Cherokee that are considered fluent speakers. So because of that, we recognized this early on. Cherokee Nation recognized it early on and took steps to bring our language back. That's very important for us. We are one of the few federally recognized tribes, and it's because of our language that we are federally recognized. There's a lot of state Cherokee tribes that are out there, and kudos to them if they're state recognized, but there's a big difference between being state recognized and being federally recognized. There's a lot of legislation right now, and I don't like talking politics, but there is a lot of legislation that's going on in Washington right now that not only affects us as Cherokee, but affects every indigenous person across the United States and probably even across the world when it comes to laws that are being passed in Washington. So, off of that soapbox. Yes?
Well, I know you don't like to talk politics.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from legislative politics, are you involved in electoral politics?
I am not personally,
Cherokee, Eastern Band.
but we have people from our Eastern Band that very much so. We have a tribal council. That tribal council is made up of two representatives from each one of our communities. We also have a chief and a principal chief. So if you stop and think about it, our chief is just like your president.
Thank you.
Our vice chief is just like your vice president. Our tribal council is that not the executive branch, but that is our Congress. And every one of our tribal council representatives and our chief and our vice chief are very instrumental in having legislation heard, voted on, and passed.
Will they endorse political candidates, such as the president?
We have not. For historical reasons. Why? We do not endorse particular people. However, with that being said, we work hand in hand with a lot of delegates in Washington to make sure that the policies that we need or the legislation that we need passed is passed. Right now there's one, and like I said, I don't like politics. I really want to get off this subject. But right now, even our North Carolina senators are blocking some legislation from being passed because they want another tribe that is not federally recognized to be recognized. And in our opinion, it goes back to that pretendian situation. That particular tribe does not have the documented proof to show that they could be considered equal. Does that make sense? I hope so. How much more time do I have first?
We are out of time.
Sorry, guys. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you very much. I do want to leave you with one other Cherokee word, and that is the word that we say when we say thank you, and that word is shki. Thank you.